Hi, this is Rachel here with my December wrap-up. I have tons to talk about and a questionable amount of battery life, so let's jump in. First, in nonfiction, I read Elon Musk, Inventing the Future by Ashley Vance. This is an authorized biography about the brilliant man Elon Musk and his companies, both Tesla and SpaceX. I was always very interested in him and his companies, but didn't know a lot about it. I found this book to be very informative, very interesting. I read it as an audiobook, and I think if you're also fascinated by either of his companies or him as a person, this is definitely a great one to pick up. You will absolutely learn a lot and feel a lot more informed after reading it. I'm also trying to get into more true crime, so I read A Daughter's Deadly Deception by Jeremy Grimaldi. And this is a true crime story in Canada about a young woman in her 20s who planned and then proceeded to follow through on that plan of killing her parents. And this story basically follows through the events after that, when she was under suspicion from the detectives, how they built a case around her and prosecuted her. It is just a heartbreaking, terrible, depressing story, honestly. It was in times very difficult to read, but I was very fascinated by the idea of what could cause a woman to do such a thing. Is it nature? Is it nurture? And the book really delves into those questions. I did find that it dragged a little bit towards the end, but it still was a fascinating story, and if you're interested, I would recommend picking it up. Next, I read several graphic novels this month, one of them being Archie Volume 2 by Waid. This is a reinvention of the Archie franchise, and I think Waid did a great job of bringing the characters to life and making them more realistic, particularly the women Betty and Veronica. I found the story dragged a bit, but I still enjoyed it somewhat. I'm a little bit torn whether or not I'll continue, but overall it was a decent novel. I also picked up the graphic novel Rick and Morty Volume 1 by Gorman, and I'm a huge fan of the adult animated series, and I'm anxiously waiting on the third season to come out. So in the meantime, I picked up this graphic novel as a substitute. It's definitely not as good as the TV show. I don't know what could be, but if you're a fan of the show and are also waiting, it's really enjoyable to pick up. It's quite funny, and the writing felt very similar to the show, so I would recommend it. I also read Adulthood is a Myth by Sarah Anderson. I understand this is a webcomic that got turned into a graphic novel, and this was super cute, super funny, basically a collection of comics all about the author's experiences, just the idea of navigating everyday life, trying to be an adult and be functional and do the things adults are supposed to do. I think it was really relatable and will appeal to fans of Ali Brosh. Finally, my favorite graphic novel of the month was Goldie Vance, Volume 1 by Hope Larson, and this is a mystery novel that will appeal to fans of Nancy Drew or Veronica Mars. Essentially, this is about a young woman who works at a hotel and helps them solve mysteries along the way. She's smart and funky and just has a great personality. She's got a lot of great wit and isn't afraid to bend the rules. I thought it was just really fun, and I appreciated a lot of the diversity in the book in terms of body shape, ethnicity, and even sexual orientations. I just thought it was fantastic. I also read one horror novel this month, and that is My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This is a story set in the 80s about two best friends growing up. However, something happens to the one friend, and the other friend starts to wonder what's going on and is concerned that something horrible has happened to her friend, and possibly her friend may be possessed by a demon. And the story really takes off from there. I heard this book described as both very funny and very creepy. Unfortunately, I didn't find this book to be either, and honestly, I have kind of mixed review of this book. I thought it was just okay, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I thought the relationship between the two characters was one of the best parts of the story. It felt very authentic and reminded me of my own friends growing up. I did enjoy the 80s references because that's something I personally just love reading about in books, but overall, I gave it 3 stars and wouldn't necessarily recommend it. This month, I also read 2 adult sci-fi dystopian books. which were quite different from each other, but I enjoyed them for very different reasons, and I'll tell you why. The first book is Byte by K.S. Merbeth. I requested this from Orbit Books because I read a sample of it, thought it sounded amazing, and wanted to get my hands on it ASAP. I do have a separate review of that, so if you're interested to hear more about it, I'll link that down below. Essentially, this book is set in a future kind of post-apocalyptic world where the main character is trying to survive in this desolate area, and she ends up running into a group of adventurers who seem to have an affinity for raw meat. It becomes apparent very quickly that they are basically cannibals that kill people, sell the meat, and eat the meat in order to survive. And she gets wrapped up in the story. This book is all action, all adventure. It's as gross as it sounds. I really enjoyed it. It's the kind of book when you just need something to fly through. It's absolutely a page turner that will just grip you in. It's not so much focused on the world building, and the characters are just kind of a fun group of adventurers with obviously some moral ambiguity, but a lot of fun. So if you just need something fun to just fly through, not having to necessarily think too hard, this is a great one to pick up. There's a sequel coming out next year, which I'm excited about, or at least a companion novel set in the same universe. So that is Byte by K.S. Merbeth. The other sci-fi dystopian book I read was quite different, and this was Feed by Mira Grant. I listened to this on audiobook, and the narrators were fantastic. There was one for the female voices and one for the male. This is set in a future post-zombie. Essentially, there was a zombie outbreak. Terrible things happened. So many people died around the world. And this book is set, I think, like 20 plus years after that, when humanity has gotten the situation under control and is now trying to rebuild. The story is told from the perspective of some young journalists, essentially bloggers and vloggers, who are going out to tell the news story. They very early on get accepted to follow the presidential campaign, and it's a really interesting story. While it's set in this like dystopian world, it's not so much about the zombies as it is about journalist activities and professionalism, what it means to tell the truth, and it's a very thought-provoking book. It's so different than the other dystopian I just mentioned. This book is all about the world building, all about the characters. It's very thoughtful. It's less horrific. It does involve some scenes with scary zombies, but for the most part, it really is a story about journalism and takes a very different tone than you would expect. So I am enjoying this. I will continue with the series and look forward to seeing where it goes. Next, I want to briefly mention a romance erotica that I read that is called Beyond Shame by Kit Rocha. This is a book set in a post-apocalyptic type-ish dystopian world, and it was so out of my usual comfort zone, not the kind of kink or anything that I would normally pick up, but I got really wrapped into the story. I picked it up late one night when I just couldn't sleep, and I've just been powering through it. If you want to know more about it, I'm actually going to put a link down below to Chelsea's video from The Reading Outlaw. She's the one who first raved about this series, and I think she can explain the books better than I can. So if it's something you're thinking about picking up, go check out her review and decide if it's something that is up your alley. Finally, I've got to talk about mysteries and thrillers. The first one I read was The Vanishing Years by Kate Moretti, and this is a book about a rich woman who has a husband and a great life. She's lives a very privileged life, but some secrets from her past seem to be catching up with her. The writing itself is great, but I honestly didn't love this one. I felt like the story kind of dragged for the first 3/4 of the book. And I think my issue is that I've read too many books like this. I don't want to say which books they reminded me of because of spoilers, but I just wasn't overly impressed. I gave it a mediocre rating. I do know other readers who I really respect their opinions who liked it a lot more. So if you're still interested in it, I'm not going to tell you not to read it. Try it for yourself, but for me, it was kind of lackluster and sort of a middle of the pack book. I've almost read too many suspense and mystery books at this point that I feel like I hold up those books to a ridiculously high standard when I'm reading and rating them, so I just thought it was okay. I also read Don't Turn Out the Lights by Bernard Miner. This was an arc that I received from Minotaur in exchange for an honest review. They contacted me asking if I wanted to review it. I thought it sounded interesting. It's about a young woman who on Christmas Eve receives a potential suicide note from someone she doesn't know and is trying to figure out what's going on. The story quickly kind of turns into a cat and mouse game where someone is doing very creepy things around her home and life and is kind of trying to weird her out, and things just go from bad to worse. Don't want to say too much. This is very dark. There was a lot of trigger warnings. Usually don't bother me, but there was actually some sexual content that I found a little bit troubling, which surprised me. I liked the beginning. It really hooked me in, but I'll admit it did start to drag towards the middle part. I've talked about it before. I don't want to scare anyone away. I think a lot of people will enjoy this one. But again, I'm really tough on mystery books at this point, and I thought it was pretty good, but it kind of got ridiculous by the end, and I really lost my suspension of belief. So you decide for yourself if this is one you want to pick up. Next, to get myself in the Christmas mood, I picked up Dying for Christmas by Tammy Cohen. This is a book about a woman who goes Christmas shopping, runs into a man who invites her to his house for a drink, and he essentially kidnaps her and holds her hostage over the Christmas season. This is a creepy, fun story. I would actually recommend it. I tend to have very low expectations for books that are kind of seasonal, but this book I thought just as a thriller held up very well, honestly. It was very twisty, very dark, and even if you're interested in reading it, I don't think you have to wait till next Christmas to pick it up. It is set around Christmas, but it really is first and foremost a thriller, and the Christmas background isn't overly done, so I think absolutely pick it up in January, February, you'll be just fine. Finally, the last book I have to talk about is Everything You Want Me to Be by Mindy Mejia. This is a book I requested via NetGalley in exchange for an honest review, and I have done a separate video which should be live by now, so I'll link that below. But this is a book about a teenage girl who is found murdered, and the book takes place over a couple different perspectives. One is the current day, the detective who's trying to figure out what happened to this woman, but it's also told over two other perspectives. One, the girl herself in the year leading up to her murder, as well as one of her teachers, because she is having an affair with that teacher. And this book tells the story of how they become involved. I found the book to be very gripping. I just found the setup to the affair to be so immersive, so addicting, and it was a lot of fun to read. This perhaps isn't the most complex mystery, but I still really enjoyed it. I thought the author snuck in some good twists and turns, and I think it's just a great fun mystery to pick up, so I would recommend that one as well. That is everything I read this month. I read a ton. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you're interested in picking them up. I will talk to you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.